Adrian Mercer told everyone he came to Greywick for quiet. A remote New England town with one diner, one gas station, and a lake called Black Hollow that looked like a bruise in the earth. The locals called it the Eye. Adrian said he needed to write. That was the lie. The truth was simpler and uglier. He came because he couldn't breathe anywhere else. 8 months ago, his sister Lila was murdered. The case went cold so fast it felt like it had been dropped into ice. No arrest, no suspect, no explanation that made sense. Only one thing remained. Her final call at 1:03 a.m. The call he didn't answer. He had watched the phone vibrate on his nightstand and thought, "I'll call her back in the morning." She was dead by morning. Adrian carried that in his ribcage like a shard of glass. He picked Greywick because the detective who led Lila's case had retired there. Detective Samuel Harker. Old school. Brilliant reputation. And the man who, in Adrian's mind, stopped looking too soon. Adrian rented the last house on Black Hollow Road. The landlord, a woman named Marla with pale eyes and hands that trembled, gave him the key and said, almost casually, "Don't go to the lake at night." Adrian smiled thinly. "Is this the part where you tell me it's haunted?" Marla didn't smile back. "It isn't haunted," she said. "It's hungry for attention." Adrian didn't understand then. 2 nights later, at 2:17 a.m., someone walked barefoot across his porch, slow, dragging, like wet skin on wood. Adrian sat upright in bed, throat tightening, listening to the boards complain beneath invisible weight. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. And when it stopped, he stared at the darkness until morning. At dawn, he opened his front door. There were damp footprints on the porch boards, bare, small, a child's, and one foot dragged slightly, leaving a faint crescent smear. The footprints did not lead away. They led toward the door and ended there. The first body was found the same day. A 17-year-old boy named Eli Carter, face down at the edge of Black Hollow Lake, water barely reaching his cheek. The lake was shallow there. A toddler could have stood, yet the boy's lungs were full. His hands were clenched like fists of wet paper. Bruising circled his throat in violet half-moons. No footprints in the mud, no obvious struggle, just the boy and the water. Greywick went quiet in a way towns only do when they've seen this movie before and don't want to admit it. They whispered the name like a prayer and a warning. The Mourner, a local legend, a drowned girl who takes the guilty. Adrian didn't want to believe in legends, but when he heard the time, his stomach dropped. Eli Carter had been last seen alive at 2:10 a.m. His mother woke at 2:20 a.m. to a sound she described as someone dragging wet feet. Adrian's porch had creaked at 2:17. That number pressed against the inside of his skull like a thumb. Adrian met Samuel Harker at the diner because there was nowhere else to meet anyone in Greywick. Harker sat in a booth with his back to the wall, coffee black, posture straight, despite his age. He looked like a man who had trained himself to never be surprised. Adrian introduced himself. The moment he said, "Lila," Harker's expression didn't change, only his eyes. A flicker of recognition, then the practiced mask returned. "I'm sorry for your loss," Harker said. Adrian leaned forward. "You left her case unfinished." Harker's gaze stayed steady. "I followed every lead. There was nothing left to chase." Adrian's hands trembled under the table. "There's always something." "Not always." The waitress refilled coffee. The spoon clinked. The mundane sound felt insulting. Adrian said, "A boy drowned last night." "I know," Harker replied. "I've been asked to consult." Adrian watched him, waiting for fear. Harker didn't fear the legend. He feared the optics. He said, "Greywick likes stories. They give grief a shape." Adrian almost laughed. "So you don't believe in the Mourner?" Harker's eyes narrowed slightly. "I believe in what people do when they're afraid." The next day, state police rolled into Greywick like a storm that didn't belong. At their center was Detective Mara Quinn. 31. Dark hair pulled back tight, calm eyes that held details the way a lock holds a key. She stepped into the small-town chaos without needing it to accept her. People didn't like outsiders in Greywick, but they liked unsolved drownings even less. Mara didn't swagger. She didn't threaten. She didn't say, "This is nonsense." She listened. She let the locals spill their fear. "A girl drowned in 83, a cashier whispered. "Eleanor Pike, she comes back." "Everyone hears footsteps," a man at the bar said. "Dragging." "A phone rings at 2:17, someone else insisted. "Even when it's off?" Mara wrote it all down. That was what unsettled people most. She treated the haunting like evidence, not because she believed, because she was trained to recognize patterns hiding inside hysteria. Her first stop was the morgue trailer parked behind the clinic. She reviewed Eli Carter's preliminary autopsy. Then she asked the medical examiner one question. "Are these bruises consistent?" The examiner hesitated. "Not exactly. Pressure marks vary. Some are shallow, some deeper." Mara's expression didn't change, but something clicked behind her eyes. She said, "So either we're looking at different causes or different hands or none at all." The examiner frowned. "You think he strangled himself?" "I think the story is lying," Mara said. "We just don't know which part." The second body appeared 2 nights later. A woman named Dana Rusk, 42, recently widowed, found in her bathtub, 3 inches of water. Her throat bruised. The water was so shallow it looked like a cruel joke. Greywick erupted. Now it wasn't just the lake. Now it was everywhere water existed. People started covering mirrors, pouring salt lines at doorways, refusing to wash their hands. Someone spray painted "She's back" on the diner wall. Someone else wrote, "Listen or you'll drown" on the church door. The town wasn't investigating anymore. It was performing a ritual. Mara visited the Rusk house. She photographed the tub, the bathroom floor, the drain. Then she asked for Dana's phone. The sister handed it over with shaking fingers. "It kept ringing," she whispered. "At 2:17, over and over." Mara checked the call log. There it was. Missed call. Unknown. 2:17 a.m. No voicemail. No number. Mara frowned. A blocked call still has routing data. A no-number call usually doesn't hit like that, she asked. "Was her phone on airplane mode?" "Yes," the sister said. "She did that because she wanted to sleep." Mara stared at the log again. Then she said softly, almost to herself, "Someone wanted it to look impossible." Mara found Adrian at the lakeshore, standing too close to the water like he was waiting for it to say his name. She introduced herself. He noticed how she looked at his hands first, then his eyes. Professionals looked at hands. Hands told the truth before mouths did. "I'm Detective Quinn," she said. "You're Adrian Mercer." Adrian's chest tightened. "How?" "I read everything," Mara said, "including your sister's case." The words hit him like a shove. He swallowed. "So you know Harker. I know he retired here. I know you didn't come for quiet." Adrian's face heated. "I'm not a suspect." Mara didn't flinch. "You are not cleared either." He bristled. "This town thinks it's a ghost." "This town thinks fear is a solution," Mara replied. "It isn't." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm going to ask you something once, and only once. Did you hear anything the night Eli Carter died?" Adrian hesitated just a fraction. But Mara caught fractions. She watched the micro-fear flicker in his eyes. Adrian said, "No." Mara nodded like she believed him. Then she said, "Okay," and walked away. But her mind had already filed it under LIE, because she'd already pulled cell tower pings. Adrian's phone was awake at 2:16 a.m. for 3 seconds, long enough to record accidental ambient audio. Mara met Harker in his living room surrounded by boxes of case files that looked like coffins made of paper. Harker didn't offer coffee. He didn't need to. Mara didn't ask. She said, "You've seen drowned bodies," Harker said. "Too many." Mara laid out the evidence. 2 drownings, 1 lake, 1 bathtub, bruising inconsistent, phone log showing impossible, calls at 2:17. Town hysteria compounding like a disease. Harker listened without interruption. Then he said, "Greywick wants a ghost." Mara's eyes stayed on him. "And you?" Harker's voice was controlled. "I want the truth." Mara leaned forward slightly. "Then tell me about Eleanor Pike." A pause. A long one. Harker's jaw flexed. That was 42 years ago. "It's happening again." Harker's eyes sharpened. Or people want it to be happening again. Mara held his gaze. "You wrote the original report. I pulled it." It reads like someone trying to convince themselves. Harker's mouth tightened. "Detective Quinn," he said carefully, "this town is built on old grief. If you dig, you may find rot you can't arrest." Mara said, "Good." And that was the first moment Harker looked unsettled. Not afraid. Threatened. Mara drove to the Pike property after midnight, not because she believed in ghosts, because someone wanted her to think it was ghosts, and that meant someone was hiding something in the dark. The old Pike house had burned down decades ago. Only a foundation remained, choked with weeds. She parked, kept her flashlight low, and stepped over stones. Her breath fobbed. The air smelled like wet leaves. Then her radio hissed. Not static. A sound like water poured slowly into a glass. Mara froze. She turned the radio off. The sound didn't stop. It wasn't in the radio. It was in the air. A soft drip, 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 drip. She followed it to the foundation. A rusted bathtub sat half sunken in dirt like a relic. Her light hit the inside. Something glimmered. Metal. A chain. Mara crouched, reached in and lifted it. A child's bracelet. Silver. Tiny. Engraved faintly with a name. Eleanor. Mara's heart thudded, but her face stayed calm. Then gravel shifted behind her. She spun. A figure rushed out of the trees. Fast, adult, human. Mara raised her weapon. The figure slammed into her, knocking her sideways. Her gun clattered away. They grappled in the cold dirt. Mara elbowed hard, caught a jaw. The attacker grunted, masked, strong. He tried to pin her. Mara bit down on his wrist hard enough to taste blood. He recoiled. She rolled, grabbed her flashlight, and smashed it into his temple. He staggered. She lunged for her gun. He kicked it away and ran. Mara chased. Branches whipped her face. Her boots slid in mud. She caught a glimpse of his shoes as he vaulted a fallen log, not bare feet. Work boots. Human. Real. He disappeared into the woods. Mara stood there, breathing hard, adrenaline hot, the bracelet clenched in her fist. In the distance, near the lake, something else moved. Slow, low, dragging. Her light swept across nothing. Just mist. But her skin prickled anyway, because she couldn't tell where the myth ended and the manipulation began. And that was exactly how someone wanted it. The next day, Mara built an evidence wall in the tiny Greywick station. Photos, timelines, names, and one big red circle around 2:17 a.m. She pulled call logs. Every victim had a missed call at 2:17, blocked, no number. But the call registered. That meant something was hitting the system. Mara subpoenaed the routing data anyway. The technician on the phone laughed nervously. "Detective, these calls, there's no tower ping. It's like they originate locally from nowhere." Mara said, "Nothing originates from nowhere." She dug deeper. Old Greywick had a landline switchboard system decades ago, decommissioned. But one line remained in records, a line registered to Black Hollow Road, Pike residence. The line was dead. The house was gone, yet the number still existed in the archive like a ghost in paperwork. Mara stared at it and felt the smallest shiver of something that wasn't fear. Respect. Whoever was doing this knew how to weaponize old infrastructure. That wasn't superstition. That was intelligence. She circled the number in red. Then she pulled up Dana Rusk's laptop history. Searches? What happens after you ignore someone's last call? Is drowning painful? Eleanor Pike Greywick, 2:17 meaning. Mara's throat tightened. That wasn't a killer's signature. That was obsession. Contagion. Hysteria feeding private guilt until it became unbearable. But the bruises complicated everything. Mara went to Adrian's house. He looked worse than before, eyes sunken, jaw clenched like he was chewing on regret. Mara didn't waste time. She held up her phone and played the 3-second recording from his device. At first, it sounded like nothing. Wind. Then, a faint dragging sound, and beneath it, so soft it could have been imagination, a girl's voice. Not a word, just a breathy whimper. Adrian's face drained. He whispered, Lila. Mara watched him carefully. Is that your sister's name? Adrian's eyes flooded. He sat down hard, like his legs gave out without permission. I didn't answer, he said. Mara stayed still. I didn't answer, Adrian repeated, voice breaking. She called me and I... His breath hitched. I thought she could wait. Mara's gaze softened, but her voice stayed firm. I need you functional, she said, because someone is using this town's grief like gasoline. Adrian looked up. You think there's a person doing this? I think there's a person nudging, Mara said. And grief finishing the job, Adrian whispered. Then what about the footprints? Mara didn't answer fast, because she had seen that dragging movement by the lake, and she hated that she couldn't file it neatly. Mara confronted Harker with the bracelet. He stared at it like it was an accusation with teeth. I found it at the Pike property, Mara said. In a bathtub. Harker's breathing changed slightly. Mara continued. Your report says Eleanor drowned in the lake. Harker said nothing. Mara's voice stayed controlled. If her bracelet was in a bathtub at her property, either someone moved it there later, or she died there. Harker's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting the scene was staged? I'm suggesting you wrote a narrative, Mara replied, and someone has been living inside it ever since. Harker's hands curled slightly. You don't understand what Greywick was back then, he said quietly. Mara said, then explain. Harker looked away. And in that small movement, Mara saw something human under the old detective's hardness. Fear not of ghosts. Fear of the thing he buried. Greywick didn't wait for evidence. A rumor started after Dana's death that she ignored her husband's last message. Someone posted it online. Comments piled up like stones on a grave. She deserved it. That's what happens when you don't listen. The mourner comes for the guilty. Then people started accusing each other. A teenager screamed at his mother in the grocery store, Answer me or you'll drown! A man punched another in the bar for laughing at the dead. The church held a midnight listening vigil where people sat with phones in their hands like rosaries. Mara watched it from her car, feeling sick. This wasn't haunting. This was infection. Fear was turning into a religion, and religions demanded sacrifices. The third victim was Sheriff Glenn Rowe, found at the lake. Same bruising, same timestamp, same missed call. Rowe had been one of the loudest voices saying, It's the mourner! He'd been telling people to stop going near water after dark, and yet he ended up face down at the shoreline. The town snapped. They didn't want a killer. They wanted something they could scream at. They wanted a monster. And when they can't find one, they make one. They turned on Adrian first. Outsider. Strange. Always by the lake. Someone threw a rock through his window that night. Another person spray-painted liar on his porch. Then, under it. Answer her. Adrian stood in the shattered doorway shaking. Mara arrived and pulled him inside. "You're not staying here," she said. Adrian's voice was raw. "I didn't do anything." "I know," Mara said, and then she surprised herself by adding, "But this town doesn't need facts anymore. It needs a scapegoat." Mara drove Adrian to a safe motel on the edge of town. She insisted he ride with her, not because she trusted him, because she didn't trust Greywick. Halfway there, her dashboard lit up. "Brake warning!" The pedal went soft under her foot. Mara's heart kicked. "Hold on!" she snapped. They were headed downhill toward a sharp curve near the lake. Mara yanked the emergency brake, steering hard. The car fishtailed. Adrian shouted. The guardrail loomed. Mara fought the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes razor-focused. They hit the gravel shoulder, bounced, and slammed sideways into a snowbank that shouldn't have existed this late in the season, dirty remnants piled by plows. The car stopped. Silence. Adrian panted. "What?" Mara opened her door, got out, and crouched by the rear wheel well. "Brake line! Clean cut! Not rust! Not wear! A blade!" Mara stood slowly, cold anger sliding into place. "This isn't a ghost," she said. Adrian whispered, "Someone tried to kill you." Mara stared toward the lake in the distance. Mist cooled over it like breath. She said quietly, "Someone is protecting the story." Mara's mind moved fast. If someone wanted the town to believe in a ghost, they needed a legend, Eleanor Pike. A trigger, 217 calls, a pattern, guilt, and bodies to reinforce it. But why? To cover something else? Or to make people confess? Or to push certain people to the edge? Mara went back through the victims' histories. Eli Carter had recently told his guidance counselor he was terrified he'd failed someone. Dana Rusk had been searching for Eleanor Pike. Sheriff Rowe had tried to shut down any talk of Eleanor being murdered. Rowe had also blocked Mara's earlier request to exhume Eleanor Pike. Mara's eyes narrowed. Rowe didn't fear a ghost. Rowe feared a body telling the truth. Mara used her authority now. No more polite requests. She got the order. Eleanor Pike's grave was opened in the Greywick cemetery under grey skies that felt like judgment. The town watched from a distance, murmuring prayers and curses. Mara stood beside the forensic team. Harker arrived too, face pale, jaw tight. The casket opened. The remains were fragile, but enough existed. The forensic pathologist examined the neck vertebrae and throat structures, then looked up slowly. "Detective," he said, voice low, "this does not match drowning." Mara's chest tightened. Cause of death appears consistent with strangulation. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through dead leaves. Someone screamed. Someone sobbed. Someone whispered, "She was murdered." Harker's face went rigid. Mara turned to him. "You knew," she said quietly. Harker didn't speak, but his silence was louder than confession. The town's myth cracked open, and what poured out wasn't relief. It was rage. Later, in the station, Harker sat like a man who'd finally run out of places to hide. Mara closed the door. Adrian stood in the corner, arms folded tightly around himself like he was holding his ribs in. Mara said, "Tell us." Harker stared at the table for a long time. Then he spoke, voice rough. "Her father did it." Adrian flinched. Harker continued. "Eleanor Pike's father, Thomas Pike, was respected. Money. Connections. The kind of man who could kill a child and still be called Sir." Mara's voice was controlled. "Why wasn't he arrested?" Harker swallowed. "Because I was a rookie," he said. "And because he looked me in the eye and told me if I accused him, my career would be over before it began." Mara said, "So you let it go?" Harker's eyes flicked up, wet, furious. "No," he whispered. I tried. He inhaled sharply. "She reminded me of my daughter," he said. "Same age, same smile." His voice cracked on the last word. I went home that night and checked on my little girl 3 times to make sure she was breathing. The room held its breath. Harker whispered, "I couldn't prove it. Not then." And when I hesitated just once, he used that hesitation to bury everything. Mara leaned in. "Where is Thomas Pike now?" Harker stared at her. Then he said something that turned the room colder. He never left Greywick. Mara tracked property records, tax filings, name changes. Thomas Pike had died on paper, but his assets transferred to a new name within months of Eleanor's death. A name that still existed in Greywick. A man everyone trusted. A man who showed up at every vigil to tell people to listen. Pastor Willen, the town's beloved spiritual leader. Mara stared at the file and felt something like nausea. Because it wasn't just murder, it was control. He had turned Eleanor's death into a legend that protected him. Now he was turning fresh deaths into proof of that legend. The perfect loop: kill, fear, myth, obedience. Mara said, "We need to bring him in quietly." Adrian's hands shook. What if it really is her? Mara's eyes softened. "What if it's him?" she replied, "using your grief to make you see what he wants." Mara and Adrian went to the church at night. Harker insisted on coming too. Not because Mara needed him, because he needed to face what he hadn't faced at 25. They slipped inside. The church smelled like old wood and candles and secrets. Downstairs, beneath the sanctuary, was a locked basement door. Mara picked it with practiced ease. Inside, phones, dozens of them, old models, new models, burners. A laptop open to a call routing program, and on a table, neatly arranged like trophies, personal items, a bracelet, a locket, a wallet, Eli Carter's school ID, Dana Rusk's wedding ring, Sheriff Rowe's badge. Adrian's stomach heaved, Mara's heart hammered, but her mind stayed sharp. "Evidence," she whispered. Then a voice behind them, "You shouldn't be down here." Pastor Willen stood in the doorway, smiling, but not with kindness, with ownership. Harker stared like he'd seen a corpse sit up. "Thomas," Harker whispered. The pastor's smile widened slightly. "You always were quick," he said, "just not brave." Mara raised her weapon, hands where I can see them. The pastor lifted his hands slowly, and then, without warning, he slammed the door shut and killed the lights. Darkness swallowed them. A sharp click echoed. Not a haunting. "A gun," Mara shouted. "Gun!" And then the pastor fired. A muzzle flash flared in the dark near the doorway, bright and violent, briefly outlining his arm extended down the stairs. The first shot blew splinters from the banister. Mara shoved Adrian to the floor and fired back toward the flash, controlled 2 shots driving the pastor backward. Another shot cracked. Harker grunted and stumbled, a wet sound escaping him. "Harker's hit!" Mara barked. Adrian crawled in panic, palms slipping on dusty concrete. Mara grabbed Adrian's collar and dragged him toward the stairs while keeping her gun trained on the doorway. Pastor Willen's footsteps came fast, heavy. Adult, human, no dragging now, no myth, just a man closing distance. He fired again. Mara ducked, returned fire toward the muzzle flash, and pulled Harker up by his jacket with her free hand. They surged into the sanctuary, breath ragged, the stained glass windows throwing dark color over them like bruises. The pastor emerged at the top of the basement steps, gun visible now in the moonlight, steady in his grip. He wasn't a ghost. He was the reason Greywick had needed one. The pastor's footsteps came fast. No dragging now, no myth, just a man. Mara slammed her shoulder into him in the stairwell. They grappled hard. He was stronger than he looked. He hissed in her ear, "You can't arrest a story." Mara gritted, "Watch me." She drove her knee up, struck his ribs. He staggered. The pastor fled toward the lake. Of course he did. The story always returned to water. Mara chased, adrenaline burning. Adrian followed, drawn like a moth to a flame that looked like punishment. Harker stumbled behind, bleeding, refusing to stop. They reached the shoreline at 2:16 a.m. The lake was a sheet of black glass. Mist crept low. The pastor stepped into the shallows, raising his arms, shouting toward the town that had begun to gather from the noise. "See?" he cried. "She's here! She doesn't want me. She wants the guilty." People screamed. Phones rose like candles. Adrian's heart smashed against his ribs. He heard something. Not a voice, a memory. Lila's sob, his phone vibrating, his thumb hovering over. Decline. His stomach twisted. He stepped forward without meaning to. The pastor smiled. Mara grabbed Adrian's arm. "Don't!" she snapped. Adrian's eyes were empty with pain. "I deserve." Mara's voice softened, urgent. "No, you deserve to live with it. That's the difference." Adrian began to cry, silent at first, then shaking. "I didn't answer," he whispered. "I didn't answer, and now I can't. I can't fix it." Mara held his arm tighter. "You can't fix it," she said, "but you can stop letting someone else use it." And then the pastor lunged. He grabbed Adrian's throat and tried to pull him into the water. The town gasped. Someone screamed. Mara fired, warning shot into the air. The pastor didn't stop. Mara tackled him. They hit the mud hard. He clawed, trying to drag her too. Harker, bleeding, stepped into the shallows and grabbed the pastor from behind. Harker's voice shook with decades. "This ends," he rasped. The pastor snarled. "It ends when she stops calling." Mara slammed cuffs onto the pastor's wrists. But as she did, a phone rang. In the crowd. A single ringtone cutting through everything like a blade. Everyone froze. The screen lit. Unknown. 2:17 a.m. Another phone rang. Then another. All at once, like a choir. Dozens of screens glowing in the dark. Unknown. 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 Mara's blood went cold. Because the pastor was cuffed. Her team had his devices. And still, the calls came. Mara stared at the lake. The mist thickened. For one breathless second, Mara thought she saw a small figure at the waterline. Bare feet, one foot dragging. Then it was gone. The phones stopped ringing. Silence returned like a held breath. And the town, already primed for belief, looked at Mara like she was the one who didn't understand. The pastor was arrested. The burner phone setup was seized. The evidence was undeniable. Greywick's ghost had been weaponized. Mara should have felt victory. But she watched the townspeople the next morning and understood something. They didn't feel saved. They felt exposed. Because the legend hadn't just protected them from a killer, it had protected them from themselves, from their own guilt, from the unbearable truth that sometimes people die and there's no meaning. So even with the pastor in custody, people still whispered. They still avoided water. They still stared at their phones at 2:17 like waiting for judgment. Harker was taken to the hospital. Before they wheeled him away, he grabbed Mara's wrist. His eyes were wet. "Thank you," he whispered. Mara said, "I didn't do it for you." Harker nodded slightly. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." Adrian stood by the hospital doors, arms wrapped around himself. Mara approached him. Adrian whispered, "So it was all him?" Mara paused. "It was him," she said. "And it was the town. And it was grief." Adrian swallowed hard. "And the calls." Mara's eyes held his. "We can explain the system he built," she said. "But the timing." Adrian's voice broke. "The figure." Mara didn't lie. I saw mist, she said, and I saw people who wanted to see a ghost. Adrian nodded, tears spilling again. He whispered, I just want to hear her voice one more time. Mara's throat tightened. I know, she said softly, and that was the moment the story turned from horror into tragedy, because no arrest could give him that. 6 months later, the pastor, Thomas Pike, died in his cell. Official cause, heart failure. No foul play, no struggle. But the night he died, every officer on duty reported the same thing. At 2:17 a.m., water began dripping from the ceiling. Not a leak, not rain. A steady, deliberate drip like someone tapping time into the air. Mara read the report and felt her skin prickle. She visited Adrian one last time before leaving Greywick. He was packing. He looked lighter, not healed, just no longer drowning. Mara handed him something, a transcript of the call routing program. All the numbers, she said, all the devices, all the methods. Adrian stared at it. So it was manufactured, he whispered. Mostly, Mara said. Adrian's lips trembled. Mostly, Mara hesitated, then reached into her pocket and placed her own phone on the table. Call log. 1 entry. Unknown. 2:17 a.m. Adrian went still. Mara's voice was quiet. My phone was in an evidence bag, she said, sealed, off. Adrian whispered, Did you hear anything? Mara looked away. I heard water, she admitted, and I thought I heard a child breathe. Adrian's eyes filled. He laughed once, broken. So what does that mean? Mara met his gaze. It means grief is smarter than we give it credit for, she said. And sometimes evil hides behind superstition because it knows people will do the rest for it. Adrian swallowed hard. And Eleanor? Mara didn't answer directly. She said, Someone murdered a little girl. A town let it become a bedtime story instead of a crime, and for 40 years nobody listened. Adrian's voice shook. What if the story was true, just not the way they said? Mara's eyes softened. That, she said, is the part that keeps me awake. Adrian picked up his phone. He stared at it for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in 8 months. He opened Lila's last call, and instead of collapsing into it, instead of begging the past to change, he whispered, I'm here. Just that. A simple sentence. Mara's throat tightened so hard it hurt. Adrian's eyes closed and tears slid down his cheeks. Quiet, adult grief, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Mara stood in the doorway watching. Then she left without saying goodbye, because some moments don't belong to witnesses. Outside, the wind moved through pines. The lake sat in the distance like a dark thought. And at 2:17 a.m. That night, no phones rang. No dripping came. No footprints appeared. Just silence. Not peaceful. Not solved. But listening. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it haunted you, moved you, or lingered in your thoughts longer than you expected, then this story has found its place. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more supernatural narratives like it, please consider subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to give a thumbs up. New stories will continue to unfold here, where restless spirits and unfinished lives still linger. Until next time, listen closely. The past has a way of whispering back.